All right, so now we're recording today's lecture here. So I see that almost everybody submitted their paper to Brightspace. I saw 11 submissions before, which is not bad. We have a 14, no, but 16 people class, so we're still missing five more. But I think today, I want to do again like last week, take a bit of this, maybe half an hour discussion, on the book, since now you guys should have read the entire book now, right? And you wrote a very, I think it's simple, one page paper. I didn't want to make it too complex. This is not really a writing class, so I didn't want to make it into, like a whole term paper. So one page, I think, is enough for you guys to kind of grasp the ideas of the book, your understanding, and at least to create, a class discussion on everything that Tanizaki discusses regarding conforming to traditional ideas while still adapting to modern thinking, right? Of how things adapt, technology changes, and keeping this idea of the essence of Japanese traditional architecture uh, at heart. Again, same thing happens outside Japan, right? Many times we like things that are from the past. um, Technology changes, we lose those elements, so how do we keep um, a mix of both, between old and new, right? So let's, like before, I think we had a nice discussion last week. So let's now focus on the other part of the book, the last, other half of the book, and we'll start it. So anybody want to start regarding the, I think we left over when they were starting to talk about the Kabuki theater of the book here.
Um, I would say he uses the Kabuki theater and the other one, is it pronounced no theater?
Yes. No theater, yes. That's why, yeah.
He uses them as kind of like these ways to segue into how shadows can even affect human beauty,
Yes.
and how in Japanese culture, the same way the whole space is not revealed and some of it is hidden in shadow to
Yes.
create this beauty. When there's a play, the whole actor's face is everything but the actor's face is shown.
Yes.
And so sometimes their face isn't even shown, it's just their hands and their wrists, and it really creates this sense of beauty and shows the natural beauty of the skin tone in that region.
Yes, because he goes into great depth again, just like before the bathroom topic. He goes into great depth regarding the skin tone of Japanese people, right? And he discusses that the skin tone is not like Western. It's a Western skin could be, I don't know, more pale, more white. Japanese skin is more, not, how did I say it? Not white, more uh
He said yellow.
like yellow, almost comparing it to shoji paper, like those
Yes.
and how natural light, or at least candle light, reflects better on their skin than, let's say, artificial light reflecting on their skin. So uh so even the way they said, the theater, the way it's done, the lighting is meant to work only for Japanese and their skin tone, right? So it's a very kind of a detailed expression of this, right?
I think the thing he says too in this part that kind of makes it interesting is he points out it's not even about the skin itself
Yeah.
and how beautiful it is or the age of the person,
Yes.
but it's just the light really does make the skin look beautiful in that color. Even though
Yes.
he has the same skin tone, when he looks down, it's not the same thing.
Yes. And how does he explain, how the whole element changes, going from candlelight to, this flooding of light, let's say Western lights that, are more typical, I guess, as things change.
I feel like he points out it's way more harsh and it doesn't leave any room for anything to be interpreted. So it's just you see everything all at once and every
Yes.
detail and every flaw.
Yeah. So because, you're kind of flooding the light, and by doing that, you kind of kill the shadows, right, in the space. And it's, I'm trying to find here a picture, but it's hard to find a picture of Kabuki, like, okay, let's see here. Let me see if I can find something to show you guys. Oh, so again, thank you, Nick. Anyone else want to comment on this?
I think when he explains the part about like because lanterns normally they use fire, and I think fire has different colors. It's like a not like a uniform color as like
Yes. Yes.
Western lights, because Western lights when you turn it on it's just a specific color. But when you turn on a candle, depending on how long the candle is, it changes
It
like
does. Yes.
temperature,
Yes.
intensity, and I think going through
Mm.
the paper screen on like the screen on the lantern, it
Yeah.
also diffuses it, and then it gives the person a different like color throughout like the duration of the play. Yeah.
That's true. I mean, this here is, this is actually one that I visited in Japan, but and it's hard to find now, one that is very traditional. But this is actually pretty accurate, depiction of a traditional kabuki theater. So, people sit over here. It doesn't look very comfortable, right? But they sit here, and they kind of put their feet underneath here, almost like kneeling down. So no backrest. It's very elaborate, style, kind of mixing different styles that we've seen. Tatami's there. There's a stage here for the actors to move along. And if we go close here, you know, is that candlelight? No, right? But it's what it used to be, right? So, there's definitely a lot of artificial light over here, right? This light is kind of more white, very kind of fake looking light. Originally, the lights were here. You had a bunch of candle lights in front here. So it was a much, much darker space here. There's technically, these are also Japanese lanterns, and they also have candlelight inside. Not anymore, but this was candlelight, this was candlelight, and all this here was candlelight. So overall, right, the way this is shown right now, it's overexposed. There's way too much light here in the space. So it was almost like that, like he describes the inner shadows in a space where the deeper you go, the darker it gets. How certain things reflect on the um, on the light, right? So typical theater is typically very limited. This is below the theater, so when they have all the actors coming down and up, uh, but it's a very traditional space. And then the actors, where is it here? Did I have an image? It's pretty much like this. They have I mean, you can almost not even see their skin tone because they just have makeup, right? So uh, it's really skin tones are not really a big deal because overall, and even here, that's they do use a kind of white paste for their skin. The colors are pretty vibrant. So because of the colors being pretty bright, you see here where the dress, the candlelight was enough to light up their clothes, right? And you can see the color and those things. So there wasn't really a need for having too much light, right? So these are some things that are kind of lost now when you go to a modern kabuki theater and you have all this kind of lights flooding the theater. You don't have the same essence like here, right? This is a much more modern theater, right? You see all the lighting here completely lit up the space. You lose that essence of the candle light, right?
But it's almost like watching a movie, right?
It
Like
is, yes.
because right now nowadays like the theater is all light up, but in the past it was like the hierarchy was all to the stage, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yes.
It was like watching a movie, right? So that was pretty much the only source of light was from there, right? So yeah, I think in like everything, there's a main focus. The stage was the main focus. There's always a sense of the actors. If you go back to tea ceremony, right? The tea master is the actor. The people that are invited are the audience that are observing the tea master perform. So again, it's always been like a show of showcasing something to somebody, right? It's always a play of light and shadow and those things. Yeah. All right. So good. So what else did you guys read in the last part of the book?
Uh, there was this idea about how an excessive use of light create a lot of heat, especially in things such as like
Yes.
hotels and such.
Yeah.
And he feels like I remember one thing he brought up was the fact that there was an increase of light in the summer when that's kind of redundant, and
Yes.
especially since how during summer the days would technically be longer with the sun, so
Yes.
why would we need more light? And that would only bring more heat, and
Yes.
it would make certain parts, like I remember him referring to a specific entrance to a hotel that was absolutely unbearable to be in because of the excessive heat.
And do you agree with those things?
I'm assuming this was in the condition like before like air conditioning. I
Yeah,
don't know if
yeah, of course, yeah. This, obviously
yeah.
they had AC in the 1970s, but it wasn't as like now, right? No
Yeah.
fans. Yeah.
But like I get the point. It's a bit excessive and redundant, especially when it comes to summer. Like he mentioned that this
Yes.
should be how it is in winter, but it isn't.
Yes.
And another thing this is like referring to something later on as well. Is this idea of that it's unnecessary and it's made for like advertising or to entice people.
Yes.
So that's where I see that point.
I mean, and that point also makes sense because if you look at lights now in your house or anywhere, everything's probably now like 90% are LED, right? So LED lights are brighter, more economical, more efficient, and they don't give off any heat, right? If I go back to growing up, let's say in the 90s, every light was an LED. Every light was what do you call them?
Incandescent.
Yeah, incandescent lights. And these lights, they gave off an immense amount of heat, right? You went to change a light bulb, you will literally burn your hands. It was so hot. So if you go to say to a restaurant and all the lights are not LED, that is a substantial amount of heat that you're creating in the space, right? And of course, the lights in 1970s, we didn't have LEDs, right? Everything was incandescent, right? And this gave off extreme amount of heat. So I could definitely see how, going to a restaurant and everything's lit up by, let's say, these modern lights would definitely increase the amount of heat. But again, Japan at that time was trying to adapt and become very westernized. So they wanted lights everywhere. So it's kind of very wasteful to have lights, always on, in summer when they have longer days and such things happening, at the same time.
Professor, but I'm surprised that because like they went directly from candle lights to modern lights, but they
Mhm.
skipped the sodium lights, the ones that
Which ones?
the one that you add water into like a mineral and it creates gas. Like it
Sodium.
was really famous like in the States like during that period of time.
Sodium lights.
Yeah, I think it was like called
Right.
sodium lights or something like that. But it's like a mineral, like the
Yeah,
miners
yeah, yes.
before
So those
before
lights I
battery
know they were used in the mines because yeah, they're but I didn't know they were used
they were using theater because
sodium vapor lamp.
mm,
Okay, oh, I'm learning something.
it
Yes,
created like a really white light because in the States people like we like bright spaces and so on.
yes,
So
yes.
it was a really popular choice. But I think
Yeah.
the Japanese people they skipped
I think
that.
Japan might have skipped that. They went from yes, from yeah, from candlelight to incandescent light. And yeah, I think they might have skipped this part here. Yeah. And of course, there's other light types, neon lights and those things that became more popular, in Japan, in Japan now, sometimes you can compare if you go to Times Square, right, and you have all the lights, there, pretty much all Tokyo is like Times Square, everywhere it's crazy amount of lights, so yeah, more now than before, but I think that's a good comparison between how technology, at least in the beginning stages, yes, it provides more light, but the negative parts, it provides more heat. So one of his struggles with that, yes. So this was, here the light, what else did we see after that? So we discussed about the kabuki, the skin tones,
Um,
lighting.
I like the I found it interesting in the part when I think you're a little close to that page when he talks about the female body
Yes,
and like how basically culturally like they would mostly focus on like the face and the hands and the feet the same as the theater,
yes,
and it was mostly to accentuate the shadows of her face
hmm
instead of like flesh itself.
yes.
And it was really interesting when he speaks about his mother. He was like,
I think
he
it's here,
remembers
right?
his mom's hands,
Yeah,
her face, but he doesn't remember her feet.
and
And
that's true.
like
Yes, yes,
that was really interesting to me because of course we're from a Western society, so like, we're the complete opposite when it comes to things like that. So
exactly. Yeah, so yeah,
and
yeah,
of course the time period is different as well, but I thought that was really, he also brings in the fact that he talks about complexion, but then he also talks about the beauty of how he views like women as well. So I found that was really, interesting that he brought in that topic as well.
yes. I mean, that's a good topic because yeah, definitely between Western and even now Japanese women. Actually, no, maybe not the younger ones, but the older one, they're still more conservative with how they look, so they tend to cover up quite a lot, and traditional kimonos, if you know what that is, right? They're pretty much, they cover up everything, right? So, I mean, if I search here for a Japanese kimono,
Yeah, I think you can only see like the base of the neck and then
pretty much, yeah. So, well, this is not typical, but let's say here, right? So, kimono, right? You can barely see the feet, right? The traditionally they have long socks. You can see the hands, maybe a little bit of the forearms, and they usually, at least traditionally, they will wear almost like kabuki, like a white painted mask, over their face, right? And they're very they don't like sunlight, right? So, when it's sunny, they always walk with an umbrella, right? And even now today in Tokyo, most young girls, when they walk, you're gonna see them with a big hat. You're gonna see them wear gloves that cover up, so even if they're wearing a t-shirt, their gloves are gonna cover up their hands, forearms, going up the elbow. They don't like to expose any part of the skin. So because to them, the beauty is not really getting tan. The beauty is just the pale white skin is what they see as a beautiful skin tone, right? Obviously for me, I'm growing up in Costa Rica, Latin, so we like tans, right? White skin seems like somebody's sick, so we have a different meaning of skin tones. And here they like to cover up, and of course, like he said, if you were growing up in the 1960s, 70s, women wore kimonos every day. So if your mom was Japanese, and pretty much all you saw was her hands and her face. That's it. You never saw anything else. So
But Professor, I think there's another beauty standard in well, I did a little research on like geishas, and like
Yes.
they normally have like they tend to make their skin as white as possible, but
Yes.
their teeth has to be like black, right?
Well, black was originally, yes. Yeah.
black and teeth. He
Yes.
talks about that too, I think.
What's that?
He talks about that too, I think.
Yeah. So what did he say about the black teeth?
Let me get to that page. I like highlighted while I was talking.
And this is a good diagram here of the Japanese women, right? So they wear those kind of hand gloves, right? They go up to here, and they cover every part of the skin, and they walk around with a black umbrella in the sunny day.
Professor, going to the beach, are you seeing like when they really when they go to the beach, they like basically they are more covered than normal. Yeah.
Oh yes, of course, yeah. That's
Because they don't want to get tan. Understandable.
yes. They don't want to get tan. Yes, of course, yes.
They wear sunscreen
But
every 30 minutes, something like that. Yeah.
the other, can I jump in? I have traveled this part on the book because I think that idea of being wanted to be white and not tan is also a reflection of status. Because if you work on the
Yes.
field, if you work outside, you're gonna get tan.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
So I pick up. I didn't like this part of the book that much as I like the other one. I feel this kind of part of traditional Japanese kind of ideas is not. It's a little bit contradictory to
Yes.
modern ways of seeing
Of course.
skin color, as
Yes.
well as when he talks about the woman body. Like a kimono looks great on a slender, thin person, but it doesn't look great on a different type of body. So
Oh yes.
I really have trouble with this part.
Oh yeah, he was
I
really
love the
like
book.
objectifying.
And here it's this part here, where it says, the chest as flat as a board,
Yeah, really objectifying.
Yeah, so a kimono, yeah, and again, and a kimono is saying it's not meant for anybody except, the Japanese proportion, let's say, body, right? So,
Yeah, and also this idea of the woman living in darkness
yes,
and never go out.
exactly.
Like
So,
that doesn't make sense on modern
no,
times.
that's a very old thinking, yes. And of course, Japan is all about status, right? So yes, if you were a farmer in a lower, because Japan's families are very much, status based, right? Even now, and it's weird. Even now in Japan, if you go to apply for a job, sometimes the companies, when you apply for the job, just by looking at your last name, right, they can do a quick search, right, and they can track down your family history, and they can see if you came from a good family or you came from a poor family. And sometimes they'll be pretty selective, in those things. Obviously, it's not good. A very old way of thinking of separating people from different family status. Even in modern times today, yes. And of course, if you were poor before, where did you work? In the field, right? You were picking rice, all day long. With dark skin. If you were rich, you were inside the house, right, all the time, drinking tea, let's say, not getting any sun exposure. So another way of showing status, very old-fashioned, yes. Obviously, it doesn't apply so much now. In some ways, I would say maybe yes.
I
Oh
feel
yeah,
it still applies in many places. And I
Yes.
also want to say it's not only Japan. There are many other cultures. I don't know. I don't know much, but India has the same
Oh yeah, of
these
course, yeah.
tangled names,
Yes,
and
yes.
Korea. I have no idea which
Yeah. In India,
country you're saying.
India is such a big country that and because it's such a big country from north to south, you go from people who are very light skinned to people who are extremely dark skinned, right? And the people who are darker skinned are still considered lower class in India than people with lighter skin. So, it still applies, again, another form of class like that, yes. Yeah.
I think it also goes with how fat you are. If you're fat, that means you're rich too. I think that's another thinking, right?
In some cultures, yes. So in some cultures, definitely, if you're fat, not so much in Japanese.
Yeah, I know not in Japan.
Which cultures are as
I think
I don't know.
wait, I think European cultures, right?
I mean, Europeans at one point, yeah, in the 1920s, that there was a club called I forgot the name, but it was the Fat Club. So only if you were really obese, you could join that club, and it meant that you could afford to eat well every single day, right? Yeah, so I've heard of those things happening, yeah, in part of European countries.
No, that also goes with a lot of Asian cultures.
Really?
Because I know in Chinese and Korean culture, like if you were like a higher class, you were supposed to be like a big man, like a fatter person, because that means you were able to eat.
Yes.
In those culture, like food was really like a social status there. If you are able to eat 3 times a day or like more than that, that means your levels was higher, and then poor people were only able to eat once at most.
Yes, I mean, I think that, but I mean, I think I saw once a documentary on some African tribe where, where they're about to get married, whoever is the fattest, gets, I guess the best wife. So, it's documenting how, when they're trying to look for the bride, they're trying to get as fat as possible for this. But, different cultures have different ideas of this. Yes,
Oh,
I mean, yeah.
so
Go ahead.
sorry, Professor, but I think like getting ripped, like getting strong is also another way to showcase that you are a lower class, because people that don't like the higher class, they don't tend to work, right? So their hands is like
They
soft
don't
and
have
stuff like
muscles,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's true, yes. That's a good talk. Yeah, I mean, it's a good discussion of this. Yes, I mean, the women body goes into this page here, right? It goes into the physique. Um, it goes a bit more into here. Let's see. We talk about lacquered. What's the next thing that he discusses? We have the glass, electricity, petroleum. What else, guys? Come on.
I think on pages 30 to 31, he talks about cuisine and presentation and the idea of how shadows can play on the presentation of food. And this could create an appreciation on how like dim lighting enhances the appearance of different type of the materials of bowls or traditional dishes.
Yes, that's a good point. I think, and that maybe we can relate. I mean, how do you guys feel about going to typically, if you go to a very fancy restaurant, the more, let's say, fancy it is, the darker it is inside, right? Uh, I don't know. And if you go to say to obviously fast food, everything's lit up like crazy. If you go to say to a nice, let's say, steakhouse, when you eat, you can barely see your food. It's so dark, and everything. And I think there's more enjoyment in that darkness of the food than if I could see every single speck of light or dust in my plate, right? I don't know. How do you guys feel with this?
My dad usually says if I have to read the menu to him, then he knows it's going to be expensive or the bill is going to be really,
Yes, that's okay. Yes, yes. That makes sense. Yes, that's true. Actually, yes, I think so. What else?
In a
Like,
way, I think light focuses on the food more than the person, right?
yeah,
Light would be like show like it would be in the middle of the table most of the time, right?
yes. I mean,
I
it goes with the enjoyment of food. Nowadays, let's say everyone, let's say, likes to photograph their food, right, and post it, right. So maybe you need more light. If you go just to enjoy the food, you just go for the enjoyment, right? Nothing else.
I think also not being able to see all the food completely also heightens your sense of taste. So it puts more
Yes.
emphasis on what's you're tasting than what you're seeing.
Yes.
And also I feel like here in the West too, fast food is designed to have you take it and go.
Yes.
And so by having the bright lights, it kind of makes you feel very um like it kind of gives a sense of urgency and pushes
Exactly.
you to leave the
Yes.
place.
That's completely correct. Yeah, Nick. Yeah. So definitely yes. So the brighter the space, and like fast food typically is yellow, orange, red colors, right? Because it makes you go, right? And they want you to go, buy, and leave, right? So having bright lights is uncomfortable. So you go, you buy, you leave. If you make the lights, toned down, if it's darker, then you stay longer, right? It's just a very typical nature of enjoyment. So this is why in a Japanese tea house, it's fairly dark because you go there and you can really relax and stay a long time enjoying the view outside. You're not there trying to escape, if everything was lit up like crazy, like most places. So good, yeah. So that plays all in the enjoyment of light and shadow, right, in these spaces. What else do we have here? We discussed about women. Yes, we discussed that.
He also mentioned something about the clothes and how men used to dress more colorful than women
Yes.
back then.
Yes, that's true, but the colors were more showy right before those things. Okay, what else? We discussed about skin color here. It kind of goes into more about that. Regarding mix. And then when you get mixed, the skin becomes lighter and such things. So he was trying to compare that to the skin tones, pretty much. Again, another big topic that he had here.
Um, Towards the end, kind of like to get back on the topic of
Yeah.
food, he did come back to food and say that there was this dish, this type of sushi that he really liked.
Mhm.
That was very simple and traditional, and he kind of uses this as a spring off point to make the point that um a lot of older people don't like the way society is going,
Yeah.
and it's almost like society is more catered towards the youth, and it's something that he feels like has been happening more and more. And now he's in the generation where he's the older generation and he doesn't really like how things are going.
Yeah.
And yeah, he just doesn't like the changes in society that are geared more towards the youth.
Yes. I mean, I think that makes sense. Right now the youth obviously is more about being westernized, right, than keeping traditions. Um, it's kind of going in that direction. Although in Japan, it's a bit of a strange thing because Japan has a decreasing population, right? Most younger, people are not getting married; they're not having kids. So the older generation is growing quite dramatically. Um, and it's going to be, I think soon it's going to be a big change in the culture as to what happens, in things in Japan, because it hasn't been getting better; it's just been getting worse every year I think for the last 10 years.
They are losing villages.
Huh?
They are losing villages, right? Like
They're
towns.
losing, yes, they're losing.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, if you go online and search, everyone wants to live in Tokyo, right, in the main cities, but everyone, in the countryside is leaving there, so they're becoming almost vacant, these little towns. So right now they're trying to sell, so you can buy a Japanese house, a big Japanese house for $20,000, right?
No, no, I think they're selling it for $1 too.
Oh, and dollar, no, a dollar was thinking in Europe, there was one town in Italy that you could buy $1, but yeah, but
No, they're doing it in Japan now. So
really,
I heard about it. I
okay,
saw a lot of like YouTubers renovations, and they bought like a farmhouse or something like that for a
Yeah,
dollar,
yeah.
but the only requirement they have to do is renovate the whole house. Like they
You
have
have to
to live
renovate and live there, yeah. So, but
Yeah.
I mean, again, if you know, if you can buy a whole farmhouse for a dollar, you know, and I don't know, and you live there, you know, it's be cool, right? So
The
yeah, this
problem
is the
is
need because they want people to go to Japan and you know, and help out with the economy, such things.
the problem is that the paperwork is hard. I think Japanese paperwork is one of the hardest thing to like
It's very
figure
hard,
out.
yes, yes. Yeah. Okay, so Bina, I think we're having anyone else wanna give their opinion on the book?
Yeah, and there was also parts where it talked about how in the past people used to respect the elders, but now it's kind of different. Like the young people don't really take care of older people.
So right now the young people do not respect the elders?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that definitely is a big thing now. That's kind of because when the Japanese younger people lose their traditional values, one of the key values that they lose is the respect for their elders, right? So, and even in the Japanese language, you know, depending who you speak to, the language changes, right? With more respect or less respect. If the person is equal to you, if they're below you, if they're older than you, then you know, the word completely changes. To address, you know, the person's status, right, in those things. So
Yeah, that
yes,
goes for most Asian countries, Professor.
I
I
think
think
so. Yeah, yeah. Korean,
even
definitely.
Chinese, yeah, Korean, basically the five tigers, basically. It's even Taiwan and Singapore, they have like that social status in that depending on who you talk to, you have to change your language. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So that's definitely a big thing. And of course, now it's being lost. This idea of meeting someone and bowing down when you meet them, you know, slowly becomes more. You know, you shake your hand. You know, you can hug them. It's slowly adapting to more of the Western, you know, meeting ways. But you know, that's culture. Things change, you know, and adapt, and we'll see. You know, what things are kept in the future, right? Hopefully, we keep some more traditional ideas of Japanese architecture, and then find ways to mix them with, you know, technology, because technology right now is at a different stage, let's say from the 1970s, right, when this book was written, and he was struggling with those problems. Now there's a whole different stage of technology issues that maybe don't align that well with traditional Japanese ideas, right? I think it's pretty good. Yeah, I think it was a nice discussion we had. With let's go about the car, the street lights we discussed. You know, I think we covered the main topics here. So that. All right. So I think. So overall, how did you find the book? You know, now that you read the whole thing.
Interesting.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, very interesting and inspiring to like apply some of these values on some projects.
Yeah. Can
I
you?
think
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think it was pretty good like at summarizing like how they're like Japanese culture is kind of struggling to stay traditional and also incorporate Western like architecture.
Yes.
But also I don't feel like they need to. I feel like they could probably like stick with their like traditional ways just by like I guess like updating like code just to make it sure it's pretty like safe for temperature, whether like basically updating like those specific needs
Mm-hmm.
instead of like going into like adding Western things. Because like as you can see, adding like Western aspects kind of like make it look awkward in a sense.
Yes.
I just think he like him summarizing like what he likes about it, what he doesn't. It's pretty good.
Okay. Okay. Good. And can you guys somehow relate to what he's experiencing? I don't know. You know, maybe he's could be growing up in a different country, comparing you know, those values to here. Has anyone struggled with those changes
Yes.
in somewhat, like what, for example?
Um, I guess I would feel like I grew up in a different country and then I moved there and the architecture is pretty different. Like over there, we didn't have like trains and stuff like that.
Yeah. So the main thing for you to change was the architecture of the
Yes.
yes, or I guess the city life, right? So being in a that's a
Mhm.
pretty drastic change. Okay. Anyone else?
Purpose of rooms, I think, Professor. Like
Okay.
In a way that right here in the US is like because we have public transport, you
Yeah.
don't really need a garage or you don't really need a place to put your car. Maybe in the driveway and so on, but like
Okay.
in countries like South America, like we don't have public transport as much, so you really need a specific spot to really keep your car or
Okay.
even like a transitional space from outside to inside.
Yes.
Right here, like we most of the houses doesn't even have like a porch in the front. Like and in Latino houses, normally when you get in, there's like a place you can sit before you really get into the house, right? Like something.
Yeah, so that's a very typical Latin American, is having this little porch in front of the house where you kind of sit all day looking at, people walking by, right? And you kind of
Yes.
interact. That's a very Latin, uh, um, I guess, architectural detail that happens. Yes, of course.
But I think the idea of like sidewalks, like making people walk, also is another thing that I think is new to Latin America because like normally when you walk through the streets, you don't see sidewalks. You walk in the street. It's
Yes.
like, yeah.
Okay.
So
That's a
I
good
I
point.
like the new implementation of like modern architecture in like into like those cultures now.
Okay.
I understand like in like the Japanese way now too.
Okay. Good. So I'm glad you guys, found the book to be, interesting. So, um, I'll go through the papers, read them all, and if you didn't submit it, just as soon as you can submit that, right? So, but I did see 11 that were submitted. So overall, that was I think it's kind of a fun assignment because we get to talk and discuss our ideas, and we have different points of view, which is nice. So, all right, so let's I think we'll finish off here with the book topic, and let's jump over to today's lecture, and we'll take a break halfway. I pause the video, um, but we're gonna start discussing a bit more of the influence of Japanese architecture on Western architects, and ideally three main ones, Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, and Frank Lloyd Wright, right? These were all heavily influenced by Japanese design and Japanese materials and its simplicity. And they all kind of took something from Japanese aesthetics and made it part of their own architecture, you know. And of course, these three architects are very different, right? Le Corbusier like steel, concrete, Mies van der Rohe like steel and glass, and Frank Lloyd Wright likes more of a natural material, stone, wood, and that thing. So, but yet they all were in Japan, right? They visited Japanese locations, temples, shrines, tea houses, right? And some more than others. Frank Lloyd Wright spent a long time in Japan. At one point, he lived there for 5 years when he was building his Imperial Hotel. So he's got a very close link to Japanese culture and those things. And you should be able to see some Japanese aesthetics or ideas in their work, right? So I assume you guys know who is Le Corbusier, right? Hopefully you saw it in a different class, history
Yeah,
class,
well,
maybe.
history classes.
Yes. So what do you know about Le Corbusier? Anything stands out?
He really designed his architecture to fit with the vehicle because that was the new thing
Yes.
that was coming out at that time.
And what do his buildings look like? If you had to give like a very simple description.
Very bold, concrete, like strong.
Yes. And he liked to use stucco, concrete, and then pretty much a white building, right? With black frames. That was kind of his signature look. Very simple, modern, right? Boxes, almost no curves anywhere, but yes. So that's kind of his style of working. He's a Swiss-French architect. He's of course one of the most famous 20th century architects that we have, right? Of modern architecture. He's known for pioneering his international style, right? So international style, it's something that he developed, mixed with different ideas of architecture. This included, very modern shapes, box-like structures, playing with the, shifting boxes, also even playing with the having the building a little bit elevated off the ground, just like Japanese aesthetics, those things. And he had a big Japanese ideas had a big impact on his work. As we said, he was really into proportion and scale. He even developed his own proportioning system that he applied to these buildings, as he made those, right? So simplicity, harmony, all these things that are found in Japanese design are a big thing in his buildings, including human scale, right? And we know that human scale, it's a big part of Japanese design because the tatami size is based on somebody laying down. So the whole scale of a building is based on a human scale, just the way that he has in the same way as Corbusier. And he also liked the idea of modular design, right? Almost like Japanese, again, the tatami is a modular scale, right? Of things repeating proportions over and over again, right? If you see here, this is, let's say a typical Japanese space, right? We have the outdoor, let's say, engawa, all these little tatami, right? But what this creates, it creates a grid system, right? That defines the size of every space is defined according to this grid, right? So this proportional scale, he found to be very interesting. This is called Ken in Japanese, and he kind of developed his own scale for his buildings afterwards. So this scale, from plan to, let's say, section, it applies in the same way. It divides the space, the height, the roofs, everything is that. And if you need more, you can subdivide it again to create other scale proportions in the buildings. And we can see, this shot, we can almost visualize the whole grid, right? The lines going here, going up, becoming the wall, going up again. This line coming across, coming down here. Everything kind of defines, certain proportion scale. And this is all based on a Ken unit. So when you say that the room is 2 tatami, that's a measurement of Ken. He loved the idea of openness, flexibility that is found in Japanese architecture. All those doors that can open up and change, the shoji doors, the fusuma doors. He made up the idea of the free plan, right? So the free plan is the idea of a space that is completely open, right? Like an open plan where, the space is not defined by walls, just like Japanese design, right? Things are more flexible, right, in a space. Or you can kind of mix and match rooms or combine rooms together as needed. Like here, this is a very large Japanese space. At this point, everything's being taken out, but you could, put walls here. You could put walls here. You could put walls here. So this large space could be subdivided. So he found that to be very interesting. And he called that, his free plan, right? Where things are not set in stone, things you can move and adapt. Like here, you can see the idea of the grid, right? Of all the alignments here, the wall, the structure. You can see here that this is 1 room, 2, 3, 4. But if I take out all those fusuma, right, it becomes just one big open space, right? So, it means that the architecture is flexible enough to change as needed for the use. You can see here, the grid, the views, you can bring in nature at any time. You can close up nature, and you can span, the size of the rooms. That idea of linking to nature, this connection also was a very important thing. And he saw that when he went to Japan, right? He saw, the idea of shake, of how buildings try to incorporate distant views, right? He liked the idea of blurring boundaries where the building creates multiple layers, right? And these layers start to create a much deeper space where you can blend the inside to the outside, and such things, right? Large windows, the gardens, all those things here. Like here, we have 1 set of doors, 2nd set of doors, and the view. So you're kind of layering so many things together that in the end, you blur the boundary between inside and outside. This is a perfect example of shake. We saw this before. The building, the garden, the wall, the trees, and the mountain, everything compiled together, making for a much, a nice combination of different elements. The Ingawa being, again, elevated off the ground. He saw that to be very interesting, where the building is almost floating above the ground, right? And this idea he took to heart, and he used it in many of his projects. We'll see afterwards. The idea of controlling the view to the bottom, like we saw last week. And also, also he's famous for things are very simple. His buildings do not have anything that is ornamental, right? It's just the form and the shape, nothing more. There's no special decoration along the edges. It's just minimalist in the same way as Japanese, let's say, aesthetics, right? And he coined the term "less is more." I guess you guys know this, right? Have you heard it before?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. And of course, he likes the basic, geometric forms of design. This we saw last week. In a way, this is pretty simple. Lots of white areas, very bright. more traditional space, but still in a way it's fairly simple in design, right? Materials, craftsmanship. He saw those the details in Japanese buildings, right? That although they look very simple, the amount of care it takes to build each one is pretty elevated, right? The connections of wood material, the thinking of the size of the space, how it relates to the outside, requires immense understanding of materials, right? Like here, having this building that perfectly relates to the outside, right? The tones of the outside match the tones of the inside. This color of the wall, should match the color of the outside, right? So it has a nice kind of balance between inside and outside. And this is just playing with, natural materials. Here's a more modern building, but of course, everything is, this is called white pine, and very light, very airy, very open, but again, a bit more bright than a more traditional building. That's something that he might have seen. This is, look at the amounts of detail, right, to create the space. So each one of these members, how it connects here, every connection is custom made. Those things had a big impression on his work, seeing the amount of craftsmanship that it took to create all these spaces. He also enjoyed the idea of Zen philosophy, right, which is simply saying being very mindful of your surroundings, right? Harmony between nature and building. When you put a building, you always consider the orientation, right? Which way is north, which way the views are, and the building should relate to its site. That's very important for Corbusier, because a lot of his buildings work with natural light. The way the sun rises and sets creates sometimes effects in the buildings, how he made certain openings. So it makes for a very cool space. This idea of simple space, he enjoyed. And one of his most famous buildings is the Villa Savoie in Paris. It's outside Paris, but this building incorporates 5 of his unique ideas, right? And many of them are inspired by Japanese aesthetics, right? So if you look at this building, Villa Savoie by Corbusier, can you tell me what things here you see, right? Yes, go ahead.
You can see the pilotis, the columns, and the windows spans, and the idea that he could use the roof.
Yes. So he's got his pilotis, right? This kind of columns here, right? Of making the building be elevated off the ground, like in a very Japanese aesthetic. The building's fairly simple, right? The windows, right? They're not just like one window. They're not just like cavities. It's one continuous flow of opening, right? So, and this opening goes from glass, and some part there's no glass. It's just a cutout. So what it creates is, once you're inside, the view is not simply just a window. It's a panoramic view of the outside. So you cannot grasp and you capture the whole inside. So the whole environment, right? On the top, he considered that to be the free plan. That was kind of his landscape idea. So up top, everything becomes more organic, right? Sometimes you get certain views here that are meant to capture a distant view, right? Something. So he starts to look at the idea of shake in those elements. This is the back of the space.
He also has an Engawa in a way.
Kind of, yes. A little bit of that, yes. All the area around it, yes. That could be considered an Engawa. This is kind of, of course, we all recognize this is the most famous view, right, of the space. And then we have other views here, like here, right? In this side of the view, it's windows with glass. In this side, we keep the same proportion, but now there's no windows, right? It's simply an opening into the inner courtyard of the space, right? But yet the view is continuous. So once you go inside here, you look out, you do get a very nice panoramic view of the entire landscape here. Then on the inside here, we have interior space and exterior space. We have the exposed, let's say, structure here, like pilotis, right? But he does it in a way like Japan, where you cannot blend. So instead of having the glass to be subdivided, it chose to use one big piece of glass. So this way, once you're inside, you really cannot tell the boundary between inside and outside. So it's almost like a continuous space between both elements. Now the view here, again, very large sheets of glass, right? Again, very expensive, but it creates the idea of a continuous space between inside and outside. Then we have, here the ramp that goes up to the garden. you see that the ramp goes almost to a free, almost like it's a frame view here, right? So you're meant to go up here, take a pause here, and get a nice view here of the landscape. And here we're bringing more nature, more curvy elements. Ideally, because you're on top of the building and you look into nature, the shapes change to become more organic to be able to connect to the distant views and such things. Other views from the inside here. This is outside in the courtyard. But you can see the views here are continuous, right, all around and going left, almost like a Japanese temple where you can see all around the space. So his 5 things were, first was the pilotis, right? If you look at his the pilotis are just structural, very slender columns, that elevate the structure, right? This creates a very open ground floor plan, similar to Japanese traditional buildings, right? That elevate the foundation. We can see them here, right? Next, we have the open floor plan, right? That relates back to the space being flexible, right? Fluid, right? That means that ideally you don't see boundaries. The interior space blends with the exterior space. Again, very typical Japanese ideas. You can see here, right? So although, so this is the ground floor, this is the main floor. All this here is exterior space, right? The line between this is simply glass, right? Because structurally, here's the pilotis, here's the pilotis. So you don't need a very thick wall here. So this is just glass, and you can easily, blend both things here. The connection with nature, so having large windows that are almost horizontal, creating this very panoramic view to connect to the outside, like here, right? And you see how the windows have a little detail here where they have a certain border, right, to make it more like a window frame. So when you look around, so wherever you stand, you have also a view all around the building always. So it keeps your eye moving and allows you to connect more to nature. See. So this is another building by Corbusier. It's called Maison Guittet. It's in Belgium, right? So here he implemented more the idea of the sliding glass doors based on the traditional Japanese shoji doors. Here. So here is another, again, very different proportion in a sense, right? It's more of a taller building. It's still the same idea of the white material, the same long windows here, right? Trying to view more to the sky. You can see here the very narrow space, but it has the same aesthetics as his Villa Savoye in a way, right? It does have one nice round window up here on the top. It's almost like a compressed. He does like the idea of shadows in a way, right? This kind of extruding shape is almost like a cantilevered balcony, but when the sun hits certain angles, it creates a nice shadow here. So the shadows kind of have a playfulness thing on the facade of the building. On the inside here, this is kind of his take on Japanese shoji, right? Where he kind of subdivides this kind of panels and they can all open up here. And in a way, they can open up the garden to the inside. You see here, there's hinges here, and hinges here. So the whole thing can open up completely and eliminate that boundary between inside and outside. This is a nice little aesthetically, round window here. Doesn't provide much of the view because it's pretty high. So the idea here is you're looking up to the sky. Another project they did was called the Pavilion for the Spirit Nouveau exhibition in Paris, right? This is all about open space, and things being more flexible in a sense. So it has kind of his, general idea of material, white stucco, black frames. The building is elevated, right? A little bit off the ground, right? It's kind of floating in space because this kind of shadow line was very interesting because having this shadow line here makes the building a bit more dramatic, because it looks like it's floating off the ground. He's got a space here for a cavity, right, with a nice kind of round opening for light, and of course a tree, which brings some nice shadows, right? It's almost like a nice contrast between here and here. That's a nice view of the tree and the space here. What do you guys think of this detail here of how the tree is made part of the building?
I think it's beautiful and it really allows for the biophilia and the emphasis on natural sunlight to just combine into one like architectural move.
It is, yeah. So I mean, and of course, this building for this to happen, the building had to be planned around the tree, right? You wouldn't just move the tree here. This tree was there. So when he went here, of course, this center point almost became the anchor for this building, right? So, and the whole building kind of was shaped around this existing tree, right? So that was an idea that was very early on, right? So in this case, nature having a very large impact on the design of the whole building and structure. And of course, it creates a very cool looking effect, Imagine here, in summer when everything has leaves, it'll be nice shadows. In winter, when the leaves fall down, you're gonna get a very cool sense of shadows of branches kind of filling the space here. So in a way, the shadows here make up the space. Villa La Roche, another one in Paris. This is the one that he lived in. Yes. So this was kind of his studio. So it's kind of it's in Paris, so it's in an urban setting. So there wasn't that everything's kind of more compressed because there's not that much space. He's got like almost like a double height space here. He's got living quarters. He's got an art studio. He's got his traditional long windows here with a white facade. So this one, you can walk from, center of Paris, maybe 10, 20 minutes and get to this building. This is the garden underneath this building. So this whole thing is, again, floating on pilotis right here. And below that is a garden. So, having this almost, to me, reminds me of a Japanese garden, something very simple, right? Even though, again, there's other buildings here. So in this case, nature's being used to disguise other parts of the site, things that you don't want to see. Then from the inside, he's got his windows that create multiple frames to the outside, which is nice. Yes, at this point, he's experimenting with his paintings, right? So Corbusier was also a very famous painter, right? And he worked on things that had a kind of a cubism style or purism in style paintings. And he liked to use his color palette in his buildings because in a way, his buildings are linked to art and art kind of influences work. So this building is almost like a bigger painting. So you're going to see the colors here are part of the painting, in the palette that he tends to use in his work. Another view of the garden. That's the interior of the space. So what do you think when you see this space, what do you imagine, regarding, living here? What do you think of the space?
It's very geometrical, and he really considers to create these different moments as you use the vertical circulation and you get to the landing. I guess to take the time to look out whatever view through the framed window, the frame view.
Yeah, so it's all about it. So let's say, like here, right? This is sticking out, right? This piece here. So imagine a person is here, right? This person can talk to this person over here that may be here, right? Somebody could be up here, and this person can talk to this person over here. So it's kind of creating, and of course, there's another space down here that you can talk to somebody down here. So it's going to create this kind of engagement of linking different spots throughout the site, right? So by having key, spaces, defined here, because from, let's say, down here, this is all open space, right? This is one large, let's say, triple height space. And he uses that opportunity to engage everyone. You might say this.
It reminds me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, it reminds me of that transition we saw on the last temple. I remember.
Yes.
That it was like all this story. You walking through this path and makes you go to this path to see at this tree, and then you keep going. It's like a little like that, like
a puzzle, right? So. And again, but do you think it's worthwhile doing this? Because you might say that it's very wasteful, right? Because, this could be complete floors here, right? But, you choose to make a triple height space. So how do you feel with the use of the architecture here? Wasteful, or it's an important condition to have?
I think it's fun and different and makes the house more active. So
yes.
I see a positive thing on that.
Okay.
And it creates all these spots where you can do different activities. So
yes,
I think I like it.
Me too. Yes, I think having this it gives the house more interest, and I think more engagement. So I think it's a fun little thing to do. Let's see here.
And also more light and air through all
More
the
light,
space.
yes.
What I don't see is any of the natural elements inside the house
Yes.
in terms of the walls and material.
Yes.
I don't know.
No, but that's a point. I mean, definitely, because if you look here, this is a big window right here. So having this big window right here brings all this light. So this light kind of filters the whole space like this, right? So in a way, having this triple high space is good because it allows this big window to have a better function to bring natural light into the space. And of course, most of his buildings are completely white, which will bounce off more light in the space, right? You don't really see so much nature inside his buildings, but he just likes the play of light and how the light bounces off different elements. Let's see here. And this is one of, I believe this is actually his only project that he built in Japan. This is the National Museum of Western Art in Tokyo, which actually is exposed concrete, which is not very, it's the one building that's not very typical for Corbu because it's not white. It is a museum, it's concrete, right? He does have the idea of the pilotis here, building being, and this actually is in Japan. It's in Ueno Park, and it's a museum. So, has some of the ideas there. Definite pilotis, everything glass behind it to make it look like it's floating. The interior, it is much more interesting, right? He's got more use of light, shadow, cavities in the ceiling. This is kind of one of the art galleries set up here. Instead of having so much of this kind of artificial light, he made this here into a light well where you have opaque glass, almost like shoji. So what happens here is when the light hits the wall here, it creates a very nice ambient light that is controlled. So no painting gets direct light; they get a more evenly, quality light through the space here. That's from the inside looking out. So again, we can see the pilotis almost like a Japanese structure. The glass almost becomes invisible and kind of brings the nature to the inside. So, these are all, really good examples of his work. You can see that he loves proportion, he loves scale, he loves simplicity. He went to Japan many times, Corbusier. He had an office there. These two guys were some of his, let's say, interns that became architects under Corbusier. So at one point, they went to France. They worked with him, then they came back to Japan, and then they continued the influence of Corbusier in other Japanese buildings. So he had also a big impact in Japanese works afterwards. So, the other person, so it's 12:30. Are you guys need a break, or should I keep going?
Keep going.
Keep going? Okay. So the other person here, keep going? Yeah? Okay. So the other person, of course, is probably, I guess, more famous, right? Frank Lloyd Wright. So this is Frank Lloyd Wright over here. So this is the big Buddha in Kamakura, Japan. So it's still there. So it's a beautiful place to visit. It's a town which is right in front of the ocean. Has a beautiful beach there. So and this is one of I think the second largest Buddha in Japan. And he went here many times. He went to Kyoto. He explored all the temples. He loved Japan, and at one point he even lived there for like 5 years. So he took it more to heart. These are all his photographs, Frank Lloyd Wright's in Japan. This is in Kyoto. Again, in Kyoto, one of the big temples that he visited. This is a different Buddha. This is not the same as this one here. This is the Kyoto Imperial Palace. Again, from his camera. This is some of the Japanese gardens that he was documenting. And he loved all these little details, the structures, the wood elements, how the buildings can integrate to nature. And of course, he's one of America's most famous architects. He's more famous for the prairie style, which is a very low to the ground kind of expanding houses that are great for the Great Plains. But he mixed that idea with Japanese traditional ideas of materials and the very long, deep roofs and eaves. And even the ideas of engawa also were a big part of his work. He loves to emphasize the lines that are horizontal, right? Just like Japanese low roofs, low structures, the prairie style. Do you guys know what is a prairie style of architecture? Before I go too much into this. Have you heard of it before?
Yes, President.
Yeah, okay, good. So
Yeah.
Bright style also has kind of very long overhanging eaves. It likes to use lots of cantilevers, right? Which create some nice shadows. Integrating with nature as a big thing for Frank Lloyd Wright. Most of his buildings were really part of nature, almost like falling water, right? Which is built on top of a waterfall. He loved the idea of Ma, which is the idea of open space and emptiness, right? This concept that we discussed before, right? He likes to use large windows, also likes the idea of open plan and how to transition between space without almost any boundaries. Again, these are all things from Japanese culture. Modular design, right? So things like the timing mat, the measurement, Wright in his peristyle and the Usonian designs adopted a similar approach with a modular grid that he created to define the proportion of his buildings that he made. Use of screens and sliding doors. So a lot of his spaces they're a bit more elaborate screens and doors, and sometimes they're mixed with stained glass. But even the stained glass designs are inspired by Japanese shoji. So you might say that the stained glass is the paper on the doors. And his most famous building is the Roby House. We'll look at it in a second here. It's in Oak Park in Chicago, Illinois, right? Sam also, because he lived in Japan for such a long time, he went through all the tea ceremony, speaking to monks, understanding the idea of Zen philosophy and simplicity that is at heart in Japanese architecture, right? He loved the idea of the roofs, the overhangs, which you're gonna see in almost all his buildings have large overhangs, cantilevers, and they create this kind of shadow line that covers most of his buildings, right? In Japan, he had a few buildings. The Imperial Hotel in Japan was a massive imperial hotel that he built. It was demolished in 1968, and only the entrance remains in Japan. Unfortunately, they were able to save the main building. But this is right now, if you go to Japan, only this part remains. This little area here, the entrance, the fountain remains. All these things here were demolished in the 1960s, unfortunately. But this is one of his watercolors of the space here.
Why were they demolished, Professor?
It was considered to be outdated. And then, they had to fight, to actually keep this part of the hotel, from being demolished. The hotel was being updated. The old part of the hotel wasn't very efficient, right? So the hotel was trying to be more westernized, bring more technology. And this was just too traditional, right? So, as part of the hotel trying to expand. So this was saved. Everything was demolished. But the hotel was kind of if you look at this photograph of the hotel, what do you think of this? It's pretty, comparing to Corbusier, it's day and night, right? First of all.
Yes. It's like I regret that they destroy it, almost like when.
Of course, yeah. It's a shame. But do you see in his design any Japanese influence?
A lot. The roofs, especially.
The roofs, yeah. So this part here, let's see, like this idea here. Here is a very Japanese aesthetic, right? What else?
He also has a lot of his like.
What's up? Oops.
You can talk.
Can you say it again? Somebody said something, but
It looks like it makes quite sense.
okay. So the building is kind of part of nature, right? You see nature, peeking out everywhere. Trees here, elements here. The roofs were green. He does have his signature look, which he liked to use brick, right? So there's brick here, right? A lot of detail here. So all this detail is kind of his organics idea, right? Of linking to nature. Let's see the next one.
The lamps, Professor.
Sorry.
Go ahead, yeah, Nick. Yeah.
I feel like something else that kind of stands out to me is he kind of takes Japanese architecture, which is very simple, and kind of really makes it more ornamental. I
Yes.
feel like he's mixing Japanese and like classical.
Yes, that's a good point because he does make traditional. You're right. He does make things like the corners, right? He makes it all extremely ornamental, right? So yes, he's mixing classic architecture with another picture of the same. Again, these are photos from the 1930s, so they're being colorized by hand, right? Somebody took a black and white photograph and they actually painted it to create the illusion of a color photograph. But you can see that that women in kimono, right? This part is probably the most I guess obvious Japanese influence, right, of the space. The idea of water is nice because it reflects the building, makes everything more dramatic space. And another key thing that he likes to use is having lines that are horizontal. So you see these lines that are coming across here. You see it quite heavily in falling water, right? So all these lines, make the building kind of more of a prey style, makes it more lower to the ground, right? And makes it almost like floating above the ground because your eye keep moving left to right, right? Another shot, right in front of the space. It is very symmetrical, which is not technically Japanese unless you go to like the shrines, right? The shrines are very symmetrical. So you could say this is a big shrine influence in the symmetry here. And then other things are, his ideas mixing with ideas of organics and such things there. So that was the Imperial Hotel. This is the part that was demolished of the hotel. So once you go inside, this was a large kind of restaurant here. Again, he always has water, has nature. So that goes back almost to Japanese. Imagine this being the Japanese garden, right? You're here, maybe in the tatami. You have the water, you have the garden, right? All these views. Of course, we have Western chairs, very slim, let's say, structural elements, lines that follow the entire building to make it look very much down to earth, and some things that are vertical to enhance the parts that are much taller, looking up to the sky. So organics, organics in architecture were a big thing because he saw organic as a way of linking to nature, right? And you can see this is the detail of the Imperial Hotel, one of the interior corners, and you can see how elaborate it is, right? It's hard to understand kind of what's happening here, but it's maybe too much happening here. So at one point he really outdid himself, and these things. Like, this really has, I would say, no Japanese influence. This kind of more taking something different, and just combining things. What do you guys think of something like this?
Yeah, I agree. It can be a tad bit excessive, but it definitely has a high degree of an ornateness to it for
Yes.
sure.
It's almost like going back to Rococo, right? That style of buildings.
I would need to remind myself.
Yeah, it's a very kind of elaborate, ornate, design, right? And even look at the columns here, right? So they start with a concrete foundation, then it goes to brick, then the brick kind of becomes stone, then the stone gets carved, and it goes almost to so I mean it's not really a, let's say, like a column, like I say, because we have typical Roman columns like Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, right? It's kind of a take of that, being very elaborate, but it's kind of a mix of everything, right? Yeah,
I
it's
also
artistic.
feel like this is what makes it stand out so much from the traditional Japanese style.
Yeah.
Really, the structure is light and it frames the view,
Yes.
but here the structure in itself is taking away so much from the outside that it almost becomes a sculpture.
Yes.
And it's very dense and heavy.
It is, yeah. So yes, so in a way, every piece here wants attention, right? And it is something that was different. That every piece here it's just attracting attention. Everything is an art piece, right? It's almost like walking through a gallery, right? You look both sides here. These are different exhibitions. So just pretty cool. I mean, this part also that was destroyed, so unfortunately it's not there. Then the other house is the Roby house. So anyone been to the Roby house in Chicago? It's in Oak Park. No? No one?
We barely left the state. I barely left the state.
All right. So it's a good place to visit. I think my second year of college when I was in the city, we took after we finished the spring semester, we took a road trip from New York City all the way up to Chicago and made it all the way to Wisconsin, looking at just Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, because Frank Lloyd Wright building has a lot of them in Oak Park, and it's got a ton of buildings in Wisconsin there. So I went exploring all these buildings. This one is this is the Roby house, right? So if you look at this house, what comes to mind?
Japanese again.
Oh, anything else?
How long it is?
Maybe like a rock garden in the front.
Okay, because this house is inspired by something else, right? Yes, some ideas of Japanese, but look at the overall picture of the house. Or maybe we'll see it later, right? Yes, definitely we have the long roofs, right? Cantilevering, creating nice eaves. These windows here are meant to be like shoji because they're very elaborate. The roofs are floating everywhere, very long lines, right? The building is not elevated like Corbusier, so it is sitting on the ground, but you have the very long lines, and the roofs are kind of Japanese in style, that sense. That's an actual photograph of the style, having the black kind of fascia, the bricks that are very narrow and long, again, to emphasize the long lines of the house, short windows here to show repetition, long eaves to create, a sense of darkness here. So there's a very strong Japanese influence, but there's also one more influence that has a big part in this house. The screen doors here, right? These are the interior screen doors. So again, a bit more elaborate than Japanese paper doors, but the idea is there, of having something between the inside and outside. Everything's very elaborate. He's got the lamps, these elements here, the doors. You see this this is a house, right? This continuous row of doors that are operable. This should remind you now of something else, right? Anyone?
More rural architecture? Like
Okay,
more
so yeah, something that we discussed last week with the Bosan tea room and that experience of being underwater, right? I think I gave away the hint.
Oh, like being a boat, right?
Exactly. This house is heavily influenced by a boat, right? You might see here, imagine this is the boat here, and this is all the windows. This is the deck of the boat. If you look here, and heavy details, not so much there. Again, very beautiful house. Did I put it like here? Maybe can you imagine a boat? All these long lines, very low to the ground,
Yeah.
floating in the water. Again, more details here of the inside. Imagine this is the front of the boat, right? This is where the captain is. And actually, this part of the wall, do I have a picture of it now? It's so let me draw it here because I don't think I put a picture of it. So if I look here, you have first of all here the roof, right? But this over here. And this part here, it actually looks like this. Like that. So this corner here is over here. So imagine you're here. This is like your boat looking out here, and that's the whole thing. So in this house, he was inspired by a boat. He was inspired by Japanese architecture, and he put out all those things together. So it's almost like a boat floating on the water. Was kind of his inspiration for this house.
Professor, you took these pictures?
This one I took, yes.
Did you go inside when you got there?
I'm sorry?
Did you go inside?
That day, yeah. Sometimes it's open up for tourists. That day I went, yes, I could go inside. Yeah, you guys should go here. It's not that bad, of a drive. Maybe 12 hours or so.
Yeah, not bad, Professor. 12 hours, yeah.
I like driving, maybe that's why, yes. Yeah, or take a flight to O'Hare Airport. All right, the next famous building, of course, you guys should know is Falling Water, right? Probably most famous building from him, and of course that building is it's in Pennsylvania, which is not that close to us. It's Pennsylvania, like 6-7 hours away. So it's not again, to drive is 6.5 hours to get there, which is it's a nice drive. But if you go there, there's about 2 other buildings by Frank Lloyd Wright in the same area, that you could see when you get there. And this is, of course, is completely linked with nature, right? Everything is cantilevering. You're sitting right on the waterfall. You're completely part of nature. The stone here is from the site. All these stones. So going back to those Japanese ideas that everything is from the site. The color here of the stucco is very natural, just like the color in the Japanese tea houses, right? He's working with nature in a sense. The trees are considered important. So, in this case, you break the structure, you go around it to keep that tree, right? So you're really working with nature and the flow. He really likes to have the idea of no corners. That means that when you have a corner window, you have glass on glass, and there's no frame there because it makes for a view that is continuous around it, which is a nice detail to have. From the inside, you're always going to see the very long eaves or cantilever roofs, right? To give some more play of shadow. And of course, his views are completely natural. You're looking at the forest inside this space. This is like a study in the space, right? We have very long windows that are horizontal, lots of natural light, stone on the walls, stone on the floor. All the furniture is built into the house. This idea of, I think before we saw a tea house where you approach by water, right? Remember that you went up the steps? He went to that space and, I think it inspired this area here because in this area, he opens up this door. He goes down the steps here and he gets to here, a little platform that is simply just floating above the water, right? That's the only purpose. You go down here, you might sit here over the water, and that's it, just a staircase floating, coming from inside the building here. We have the nice dark areas, with the large, cantilevers. Of course, the overhanging roofs is a big thing of Japanese aesthetics, right? And nature. He does a few things differently, like this large cantilever. He added, a bit more openness here to get more natural light in the space. Otherwise, it'll be pretty dark in space. But his building has a nice setting because the building is just, the background is all green, it's completely set in nature. So the building really fits well. And having all these large cantilevers is a great way to frame views of nature, right? Just like in Japanese tea houses or temples. I mean, over the years, they've had to fix, the cantilevers because they were starting to sag. So a few years back, they had to reinforce all the cantilevers with structural steel because they were starting to fall, right? This building, again, is fairly old. This is a great shot that I love, having, the staircase here and having this large cantilever just kind of floating above the waterfall. So it really reminds me of a Japanese detail of, of the building merging with the landscape. And then he's got other buildings. This is so he's got two Taliesin West and Taliesin East. Taliesin are his architectural schools, and actually they're still open. So there's one school in Arizona, which is Taliesin West, and one school in Wyoming, which is Taliesin East. And these are architectural schools, so you can apply to the school today, and you could actually go to a school that is pretty much a Frank Lloyd Wright architecture school. And even now it's open. You can apply and get a degree from one of those schools. This is the one in Arizona, right? You can see that all the materials from the site, very low to the ground, bit of nature blending. It kind of resembles, the color resemble the site. It's kind of desert site. Here is playing with the organic, architecture of using things on the site to create the building. This is one of the rest areas in the building, right? So all the furniture is built in, right? Everything's completely meant to fit with the actual design of the building. Even this is actually pretty cool chairs, right? Lots of glass. And some things that are a bit more, this is almost like the hotel in Japan, right? Where you're really becoming very kind of artistic with all the little details here. Then we have the Unity Temple, also in Illinois. So this is one of the models. Again, very strong lines, a bit of detail here. This kind of reminds me of the hotel in Japan. All these little details here. It's got a large cantilever there. No windows for the most part. It's a temple. So the only windows are really up high. Everything else is solid. And inside, this is actually good looking to the ceiling the ceiling has all these multiple square elements, which is almost like a nice stained glass, like shoji. So it dilutes all the light coming into the space. So these are all the ones here on the ceiling here. And it's a pretty elaborate interior space, right, for this temple. It's almost like like the inside and the outside, it kind of merging together. What do you guys think of something like this?
It's almost like a time capsule. It's like it's bringing me to the past. Almost.
It's almost, yeah, exactly, yeah. So, I mean, it's got plenty of, you can say, the grid is a big part. There's so many lines here coming across. So many lines that are horizontal, vertical. So it's almost like the whole thing is designed by a grid system, right? Just like the Japanese tatami, in a sense. Even the lamps, are like, following this kind of grid system here.
The lamps is really I think it's the most Japanese thing that I think
Yes.
that pops up. Like I think I can see it in the Imperial Hotel too.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Exterior too, yeah.
Yeah, these natural materials. Again, very cool shot here. So again, having this control of light it's a nice thing to have, where the only light here is just ambient light, no direct light. And this kind of, these are again, he's got many more projects, but this is some of the one I thought had most connection to his work, right? And we'll look at one more, then we'll finish there. I don't know why I have 336 slides and I'm only up to 210. So we're not gonna go through all of them. I don't think so. We'll push the other ones for the next class. But let's talk about Mies van Der Rohe. What do you guys know about this architect?
I would say he puts a lot of emphasis on letting the natural beauty of the material speak for itself, and
Yes.
the aesthetic of the material being the ornamentation.
Mhm.
So I would say he's the opposite of Frank Lloyd Wright in a lot of ways.
Yes. What is his famous building in New York City?
The Seagrams.
Yep, exactly. The Seagrams. It's a we'll call it a skyscraper, right? It's a tall building, right? And what's unique about the facade of the Seagrams building?
Isn't it using bronze I-beams?
Yep, exactly. It's just bronze I-beams on the facade, right? That's all it is. So he likes to expose the material for what it is, right? No need to hide it. So he liked to use steel and glass. Those were his main, materials. His most famous house is the Farnsworth House, right? And this is the house, right? So in a way, it's almost like it's floating. It almost has pilotis. There's almost no facade. It's just glass, floor to ceiling glass. So wherever you are in this house, right, you're always in link to nature. And where the house is located, it tends to flood a lot. So sometimes you get these cool shots, where the house is mostly flooded, right, because it's near to a lake, and you get this kind of all this nice reflection here of the house. And you see here from interior space where there's no glass, here's glass, so it is kind of a blending from inside to outside. Here's the lake that tends to overflow once in a while. And you see and this is what's nice here, is that from inside the house to the outside, because there's almost no boundary here, you lose track of where things are. So it's almost like the grass is the same level as the inner floor. And that's only because the house is being elevated on the structural elements here. Again, you're inside the house, full glass windows, almost like Le Corbusier. You completely bring in the nature. So from anywhere in the house, you're always looking at the outside, right? So the main view here is always the nature. So it's a simple flat roof structure. It has a nice set of steps. So you go from here to one platform, you go to the second 4 steps, next platform, and then you enter the house right here. Has anybody been to this house? I think there's been a few trips in the school to look at this house. It's in Connecticut. No?
Nope.
Okay. I think this house, actually, we're gonna use it in my next class today. We're gonna do a Photoshop assignment with this house for those that are taking my class. All right, so again, another view of the house here. He's got also the very famous Mies van Der Rohe chairs, the Barcelona chairs. He's got also the Barcelona Pavilion, but I didn't show it because it's a very typical building that you guys already should know. Next is the Illinois Institute of Technology, which is a much more large scale building, right? But he's got his ideas of the steps, the floating. He tends to elevate the floors. And although Mies van der Rohe didn't really go to Japan, he was really influenced when he saw the Japanese pavilion at one of the world fairs. So there's where he got inspired by Japanese culture and those things. But he wasn't like Frank Lloyd Wright or Mies van or like Corbusier, where he actually spent time in Japan. We see here the campus. You can see here how it's kind of the floor is elevated to make the building appear lighter. Everything's structural steel, everything's glass. From once you're inside, there's almost no, actually, in this one, there's no columns. This is why it has this structural element here. So there's no obstructions to look at the outside. So it's always a continuous view throughout the entire building.
Professor, he never visited Japan, or
I believe he never, I'm pretty sure he never visited Japan, yes. He visited some of the world, what do you call them, fairs, where Japan would, create different, traditional structures for exhibition, right? So I believe that's how he, became aware of Japanese, design. Another one here, again, he likes to play with the idea of kind of heavy things being on top and the glass making them appear like, unbalanced, right? So of this kind of proportion system. This is, this start to remind me of Japan, right? A little bit. If you look at us, if you saw the Noah Theater that we had before, did I still have it? Yes. Here. All these elements on the roof right here, like, of course, not as detailed, but yeah, starts to create this kind of sense of a bit more aesthetics on top. Here we use bamboo. Here's more like probably steel, painted, and we highlight all the structural elements here, and then we float everything else, and everything's painted black because it makes it look more of a floating sense, because we hide the details of the structure. So all we see here is just a black area. We don't see how it's connected. We don't see the bolts. So it's a nice play of shadows with this building.
I'm surprised that he was able to bring the idea of fusumas into the
Mhm.
thing. Because like those walls inside looks like the fusuma inside the building of
Yeah.
Japan.
Exactly, yes. They almost look like that. Again, the idea of the free plan, right? The space. It's another building in the Czech Republic called the Villa. I can't pronounce that. Tugendhat. Let's see here. This is more like a bit more of a residential building. So the other buildings are like this one is, obviously a larger scale building, but this one here is residential. So here's where you see a little bit more of the Japanese influence on his work, having the large windows, just like Le Corbusier space here. The use of materials here, this wall, use of colors, again, large windows. He's got here the idea of pilotis, but in chrome, right? Because chrome was the style in that time. Here we have the outdoor skin. Again, this is also very famous on his Barcelona pavilion, right? He's got those cross-shape stainless steel structural elements, and you can see kind of this layering of the floor, the column, the window here, and the nature. So that kind of system, relates back to Japanese architecture. And of course, his most famous building that he's done is the Barcelona Pavilion, right, in Spain, right? That although the whole building is simply just marble, steel, and glass, right, it creates that idea of an open plan, right? The whole building is linked to a grid. So all these lines of the panels, these are 3x6 panels linked to here, right? And the floor are 3x3 panels. Everything is defined kind of by a grid system here. We have the large cantilever elements, lots of glass. So although this is a very strong into patterns and colors, if I take away all those colors and just leave the lines, then we start to see kind of the Japanese influence here of the shape, here of having multiple layers, like one layer here, one here, and then nature. All this layering becomes an aesthetic value for that Japanese architecture. Yes, so this is very minimal in style. This is one of the outside elements here. So if you're taking before my Japanese, my rendering class, sometimes I'll use this project to render in the class, and we'll spend lots of time trying to make it look realistic, and playing with light shadow to make this create the space. But this is a nice space because shadows here are very important. This is why this thing is sticking out here. When the sun is here, it creates a very nice shadow inside here, right? And even when the shadow moves, see how her hands are kind of blocking the light? When the sun is here, it makes a really cool pattern over here. So the whole building orientation works with the way the sun moves. You can see here all the alignments here are perfectly done with all the materials. So a very strong use of grid and pattern. So 3x6 and 3x3 are the main, let's say, grid system here. Is that okay? So that means in my next topic, Kengokuma. See, that's another long topic. So I think that's good for today. Yes, I think we mostly covered the three main architects. That was Mies van Der Rohe, Lloyd, Wright, and Le Corbusier. All of them are obviously extremely famous. All of them had a part on being influenced by Japanese traditional ideas in different ways, right? Very different ways. Each one has a unique style, right? And how they perceive to use Japanese architecture, right? So I think it's a good way to see it. In the next class. So next week, class will be on Wednesday because Friday, so obviously it's Thanksgiving. So Wednesday follows a Friday schedule. So I think I told my morning class, Wednesdays for me are tough to get to school. So we might have a Zoom class pretty much for next Wednesday. So you guys know. But next Wednesday, we'll start to transition into looking at modern Japanese architects, including looking at Kengokuma and other. So it'll be a much, I think, longer lecture because I want to cover, Kengokuma, maybe Tojo Ito, Tadao Ando, and there's a bunch of other lesser known architects that are Japanese that are starting to become more famous. So I want to go through, their work, and see how each one is kind of treating Japanese ideas into their own style. Kengokuma is probably the one that has the most connection to Japanese traditional ideas because he likes that. Other ones are maybe more modern, so you can hardly see the aesthetics there, but it still has some idea to connect those elements. So I think that'll be the main focus for the next topic in the class. Any questions?
No questions.
No, you guys are good. So yeah, go ahead.
Can I speak to you about something after class, Professor?
Sure, no problem. We can do that. Yes. Yeah. All right. So for now, don't leave yet. I'm just gonna stop the video now. I'll stop recording, and I'll post it afterwards. In the YouTube channel.